I still come down to the idea that it's all a good thing that puts the idea of documentary as a foremost medium in the minds of viewers who now, I mean, documentaries are more prevalent and popular than ever. Now, what documentary means in terms of what is a different question, but I think that the sort of evolution of it has been good.
When you conceive in the edit, when you shoot and when you conceive in the edit how you're going to get your film out, do you think about the sort of visual grammar of the small screen versus the large screen? Is that something that is part of how you think about putting it together, or?
I think this would be a really embarrassing thing to say, but not really.
Okay.
I think I'm so focused on the narrative.
Right.
It's not that I'm immune to, considering like what I'm shooting and how I'm shooting it, but insofar as like I fortunately or unfortunately have come from a background initially in TV, and so the idea of having sort of cinema in mind or sort of a theatrical setting in mind has not been something germane to what I've been doing. It's sort of only recently become, and I don't even say a luxury, it's just a different way. Like we all grow and mature as storytellers and filmmakers, and so it's not something that I have been thinking about specifically, and especially when it comes to archive. I think I've actually lived through an era. I mean, I want to say you do different films than I do. It's interesting even where we've arrived at now, where once upon a time, 15 years ago, you're making a film and you're using archival footage, and just with the advent of HD, in 16 by 9, you're like, oh, what do you do with this footage? Like, we can't have, depending on what it's for, you can't have black on the sides, you can't have, and so it ended up being this very strange. Now at least we live in a world where those concerns, depending on who you're doing them for, are not as prominent. And so that being said, I now more than ever am more considerate of what I'm shooting and for theatrical sort of possibility. But frankly, until a few years ago, it wasn't something that was, that prominent in my mind.
And you've seen through the course of your work as a director and a producer, the evolution of broadcast and streaming. And so how have you seen that change in terms of what the relationship and the understanding is of documentary? Is it, because I feel like we went through a period of, or that we're sort of now there's 9 or 10 major streaming buyers. And there's a lot of focus on celebrity in particular. But how have you seen that evolve, and how have you seen the change in appreciation of documentary?
I mean, I can answer that in a couple ways. I mean, look, there's more content that exists than ever, and so that means there's greater opportunity for filmmakers to make films, and that's objectively good. The flip side of it is that there's more content driven by entertainment networks and or whatever you would call Netflix or Amazon, if you call them networks or you call them technology companies or streamers or whatever you want to call them. And so, they have like networks before, they have an obligation to entertainment and to viewers. And so the idea that, again, we're at a festival now with this traditional film market, and there's a purity to films that get done and how they get bought, and this sort of there's a routine and an elegance to it, and there's a purity to it in terms of how that gets done, but also there's not this sort of real thought that there's going to be pots of gold at the other end. It's about sort of satisfying the art that gets made and allowing filmmakers to thrive and to see their visions through. And I think with Netflix and Amazon and these places, there is a demand for these prestige docs that need to entertain and need to they do focus on celebrity. And so there's a lot of money that gets thrown into these films, sometimes I don't want to say at the expense of the quality, but sometimes there's a lot of arrangements that gets made but in the end, I will still come down on I'm not quite answering your question, but I still come down on the idea that it's all a good thing that puts the idea of documentary as a foremost medium in the minds of viewers who now, documentaries are more prevalent and popular than ever. Now, what documentary means in terms of what is a different question, but I think that the sort of evolution of it has been good. Now, in terms of the opportunity for who gets to do those docs, that's a different thing. And I think there still might be whatever the not literal handful, but sort of small group of filmmakers who have access to these type of docs that these streamers would like to do. To me, it does not necessarily promote the most democratic way of having filmmakers do films. Not that, by the way, the truest artists want to do those type of films. So that's a different thing. And so in some ways, how has the documentary world changed for those true artists who really sort of struggle to get their film and their visions out into the world? That's a question that, and for the way I've made films, I haven't really done that in that way. And so I can understand how the appearance of the opportunity or the proliferation of docs doesn't necessarily jive with the reality of what a lot of these filmmakers still go through to get their work seen through the world.